Ange Postecoglou has been sacked by Tottenham Hotspur 2 years on from when he was first appointed. He's officially gone. The Ange Postecoglou era at Tottenham Hotspur has drawn to a close. And to be honest with you, it still doesn't really feel real to me. I'll be honest. When I saw the announcement earlier, obviously there was a massive build-up to the decision. Tottenham Hotspur seemingly couldn't make their minds up, or God knows what they were trying to sort out for those 2.5 weeks since the Europa League final. And there was a big build-up. People were talking about whether he was going to be sacked, whether he wasn't going to be sacked. There was about 1 million in the know rumours floating about, people telling you that he was definitely going to get sacked, people telling you that he was definitely going to stay in the role. And eventually it felt like a bit of like a weird anti-climax in a lot of ways. I couldn't really tell you how I felt in those 2 weeks. I was somebody who really flipped on Ange Postecoglou in sort of the January, February time. I thought it got to a point where I just couldn't really take it anymore, and I was really on that side of Ange out, and I was that for the rest of the season really. But I was out there in Bilbao. I obviously travelled out there, watched the game in the stadium. Best night of my life by a country mile, to be honest with you. Sorry to any family members or anyone I've done anything cool with. That was the best night of my life by 1,000,000 miles. And after that, it really changed for me. It really sort of brought me closer again to Spurs. I felt it brought me closer to the manager, to the players, and I was then in a place where I was happy with Ange Postecoglou to continue as the manager of Tottenham Hotspur heading into next season. In the 2 weeks after the final, I've been sort of trying to work out how I feel about it. I really was. I couldn't tell whether I still thought it was the right thing to move on from him. I couldn't tell whether it was all the emotions of the game. I couldn't tell whether sort of the trophy was blinding me, the long-term vision. And that's what I really wanted to talk about in this video, because there's lots of different parts that play in this. There's lots of different moving parts. There's lots of emotions that are running very high, and I completely understand that. Obviously, all the reaction on Twitter tonight, it's been carnage. People are fuming. People are happy. You know, there's a real mixture of emotions. It feels like people are really one end of the spectrum or another. There's no real sort of balanced in the middle views, I guess, going on right now. But, you know, it's a highly emotional time for Tottenham fans. Like I said, we just had the best night of our lives, and then we've sort of been in the dark for 2 weeks about what was happening with it. A lot of people have got huge attachments to Ange Postecoglou. I mean, I love Ange Postecoglou, and I will always love him for that night. I don't feel like I've got the same attachment to him as a lot of Tottenham Hotspur fans seem to have, which is, you know, sort of where the hugely emotional responses have come, I think. But it's completely valid. It is completely valid, and I completely understand how everyone feels on every single side of it. And that's really where I wanted to start in this video. Was it the right decision to sack Ange Postecoglou? And like I said, I'm still not really sure. I think my answer would be yes. I think it would be yes. I do think, looking at the long term, I do still think it was the right decision to part ways with Ange. I think it was my emotions, and football is a hugely emotional game, and I think that's, again, fair enough. Like, if he got given the start of the season, I would have been absolutely okay with that and absolutely happy with that, and got behind him once again, as I always do when I'm in the stadium, supporting the team week in, week out. But I think there's a lot of parts to play. We're going to talk about Daniel Levy and the Tottenham board and sort of the blood that they've got on their hands, in my opinion. As we all know, like, you know, I've talked about them. I've done a whole video on this channel talking about how they are the problem at Tottenham Hotspur and how things don't really matter outside of them. Like, they are the most important thing, and they are the biggest problem at Tottenham, and nothing will really change, in my opinion, until Daniel Levy is no longer at the football club. But that aside, I still think that we had an 18-month sample size with Ange Postecoglou where, yes, people cite injuries, and yes, people cite sort of maybe a lack of proper backing last summer, and I completely hear all of that, and I don't think Ange is 100% to blame for our league form this season, our league form in the last 6 months of last season as well. I do think there are other factors that definitely come into it like that, but I think he has to take a huge responsibility for that too. And this season, look, I mean, I've spent silly amounts of money, you know, following Tottenham this season. Been to 35 plus games this season, obviously the final out in Bilbao as well. And apart from that final, before that final, really, it was an awful season. It was dreadful. It was draining. It was sort of devoid of any identity, the football that we were playing. And I do think that final sort of has made people forget that. And I do think it would have been a long road back to a place where I would have been happy with what we were seeing next season. I think it would have been a long road back there, and I don't think Ange maybe would have got enough time, and I think everything would have flipped again quite quickly if we were then to see the same patterns emerging in the Premier League. And I do think that would have been a problem, and I do think that would have been something that came up again with Ange Postecoglou. And yeah, it's a really difficult one. Let's move on to the board now, because I did want to talk about them, because they are sort of, again, I think keeping us in the dark like they did for the 2 weeks, I know that they obviously had a big decision to make, and that is completely fair enough, but nothing is going to change at this football club until Daniel Levy is removed. But that is also why I feel like it was correct to move on from Ange Postecoglou. I think Ange Postecoglou is a manager where he has an incredibly high ceiling and an incredibly low floor. I think everyone accepts that and everybody realises that at this point. And I think we were seeing him closer to the floor for a number of different reasons. I think a lack of squad depth last summer really hurt us, in my opinion, in terms of the Ange Postecoglou project. We only got Dominic Solanke's deal over the line in terms of somebody who was ready-made and coming in to really impact that first team. I know Bergvall has done that as well this season. Archie Gray subsequently did that as well, because obviously two 18-year-olds thrust into the action, and Ange Postecoglou was sort of always very strong on the fact that these two boys are doing amazingly, given the fact that they weren't meant to play these roles this season, really. But that for me kind of set him up for failure in certain ways, but it didn't set him up for the failure that happened. Like, despite the injuries and despite everything that was happening, I needed to see way more from him this season. But like I said, he did then sacrifice that league form for the Europa League and delivered us our first trophy in 17 years. And for that, I'll always love him. And for that, he could have earned himself next season, absolutely, like I said. And it's very difficult to kind of sum up whether that overrides the sort of league form. And I do think it overrides it for me. Like I said, that Tottenham had a better season than Arsenal, all that kind of thing. Like, it did definitely override the poor league campaign for me in terms of how I felt about the season. I just don't know whether taking the emotion out of it, as I sort of have tried to do today, and looking at the bigger picture, it might still have been the right decision to sack Ange Postecoglou. Obviously, a lot of that depends on who we now bring in. It's looking like it's going to be Thomas Frank, which I'll talk about in a minute, and I think I'm a lot higher on that than other people are. I'm really am a massive fan of Thomas Frank. But yeah, like I said, the fallout on Twitter today and the emotions that people are feeling and sort of the crash outs that have happened all over social media from Tottenham Hotspur fans, I completely get it, and I think that is really the emotional side speaking. Like I said, I think people that are saying that, it's completely unacceptable to sack him and all that kind of thing are wrong. Like, I mean, not wrong, you can't be wrong, it's a football opinion, right? But, like, sort of, you can't say that there was no justifiable reason to sack him. I think whilst I would have probably given him the start of next season too, you also have to look at it and say, you know what, there was a valid reason to sack him. There was a very valid reason to sack him. And I've got huge issues with the ownership, and I'm, as Levy out as the next man is, right? But I don't think that decision necessarily sways how I feel about Daniel Levy in particular. And like I said, I think Daniel Levy, I don't think Ange Postecoglou would have ever had us challenging on the Premier League front, on the Champions League front. I'm not saying another manager necessarily will, but I don't think Ange Postecoglou was ever going to be set up to succeed at Tottenham Hotspur. I've always said with Ange, if he went to like a City or, I don't know, a team that were dominant in a league, like you saw at Celtic, really, obviously a lower level of football, but I think if he has the resources and the quality there, he could be an amazing manager. And I think if he went somewhere like City and he had those players at his disposal, where he had such a deep squad filled with such immense quality that could just carry out the style to a T of what he needed to do, I think he could be a hugely successful manager. I wish him success in his next chapter and on his next journey, and where he is next going to go. And yeah, I think our owners would have always held him back. And I think that's where somebody like a Thomas Frank comes into it. And I think Thomas Frank's positives, because you've got to look at it realistically, we do have these owners, and these owners are not going anywhere. And I think that Thomas Frank coming in, he gets the best out of what he has. And I think that his floor is definitely a lot higher than Ange Postecoglou's floor is. I think his ceiling is lower than Ange Postecoglou's ceiling is. And I guess that's sort of the sacrifice, the balance that you want to make. I just think with what we need over the next year or so in terms of stability, I don't even necessarily think Thomas Frank will be the long-term manager of Tottenham Hotspur. I think he'll get us back to a position where we're really stable, and then we maybe look to make that next step past Thomas Frank. Who knows? I still think Thomas Frank, though, I'm a big fan of Thomas Frank, and I think that he could be the guy who allows us to sort of re-stabilise and then go again. I think he's got a higher ceiling as a manager than maybe people give him credit for. And I think that if he gets some of his players in, I think he profiles players so well, and I think he's going to get the best out of players like Matisse Tell, Wilson Odobert up front, Dominic Solanke, Kulusevski, Maddison, all of the quality players that we still have. Because I think people do forget that. Like, we do have a quality squad, in my opinion. Like, defensively, it's going to be again, this is another point with Ange Postecoglou, is like, he had the dressing room in a chokehold, basically. Like, that dressing room would die for him. And that is something that can't really be underestimated as well. It's looking like Romero is going to leave now. I think that's pretty much guaranteed with Ange Postecoglou going. Apparently, according to Matt Law, who is obviously a Tier 1 journalist, there's going to be other senior players who could look to potentially leave this summer as well, who look to push out of the door. Which, you know, is understandable. The relationship they had with him, I don't know how easy it's going to be for some of them with the contracts they're on, etc. Actual other teams coming in and paying the money that Spurs would want for them. But I think it could really rock the boat at Spurs. This will rock the boat at Spurs. It's going to be an uncomfortable summer, and it's going to be a really, really interesting fallout to sort of watch happen. It's going to be painful this summer. It will, and I'm really sort of intrigued to see how it all plays out. Intrigued in a bad way to see how it all plays out. And I feel like it could be bad. It could be really, really bad on some parts. Because, like I said, some players were just so bought into him. And we're coming out and talking about him after the season and saying we can't sack him, all this sort of thing. And I do think that plays a massive role in it too. And, yeah, like I said, these are sort of like a lot of the reasons I've said in this video are very valid reasons as to why I and a lot of other people could have potentially wanted Ange to stay as well. I was very in the middle of it. Like I've said in this video, I was very, very in the middle of it. I can see the reasons as to why we got rid of him, and I think it could be a sensible decision doing that. Another thing with Ange is that the new manager is now going to have immense amounts of pressure placed onto his shoulders, because it's always going to be a case of what could have been with Ange, what could have been in season 3, what could have been if, you know, we'd had an injury-free season, or, you know, all this what ifs if the new manager doesn't succeed. If the new manager comes in and is successful with Tottenham Hotspur, I think we'll forget about Ange Postecoglou pretty quickly. I mean, we'll always remember him, right, because of Bilbao, because of the trophy, but I think we'll sort of move on emotionally pretty quickly to the next manager, because that's just the nature of the beast. That is just football. Football works in cycles, and you get drawn in, you get drawn back out. It's just how it works. We're all very emotional as football fans. We all know this, right? And I think we will get drawn into the next manager too if they are successful. But like I said, it's going to be huge pressure on the next manager. That manager has got to be able to handle it. I personally, again, I think Thomas Frank is the kind of character who has the charisma to deal with that and to work through that and sort of win people over in his own way. And that is something I like. I think if we were getting in a manager who didn't have a big personality, or wasn't that likeable, or didn't really get the fans on board early, I think we could be seeing huge issues with the next manager, like I said, because Ange, I mean, say what you want about Ange Postecoglou, but my God, could that boy speak. Don't know why I'm calling him that boy, he's like 40 years older than me, but that man could speak, and he could win people over with his speeches, as he did. And I think his speeches after the parade, or at the parade, the third season is always better than the second season, etc., etc., which I don't think is necessarily always true with TV shows, actually, but there you go. There's going to be no season 3 with Ange, and I think, yeah, the new manager will be under pressure to sort of win over the fan base early, especially with how the emotions are. I don't know when it's all going to settle down, really. I feel like the new manager will probably be announced next week, next Monday, Tuesday maybe, all depending on how quickly the talks go, sort of whether we've been in talks with the manager previous to sacking Ange Postecoglou, which you would imagine we had. There were rumours coming out that we'd spoken to Frank extensively last week and the week beforehand, so you don't know how long this sort of process is going to take. I feel like once the new manager comes in, everything will settle down a little bit. Pre-season will start. We've obviously got the games in Hong Kong, I believe, against Arsenal, against Bayern Munich, I think we're playing as well. So, you know, there'll be, I think, a period of mourning now, especially over this weekend. And I think, you know, because you've got to move on pretty quickly in football. Like, you can't get too attached to things that are now in the past, because that's just not how football works anymore. Football is such a fast-moving industry. And like I said, I completely get how people are feeling about Ange. I'm feeling a little bit down myself about it, just maybe because of the fact that it didn't work out, and I wanted it so desperately to work out with Ange. He's the exact kind of figure and personality that you'd want leading your club, right? It just never really worked out on the football side in the league. And, you know, I do also think that people are saying, oh, you know, we can, like, it just shows that Spurs only care about league position rather than trophies. I don't necessarily think that's 100% true just because they've sacked Ange, because I think, given the evidence of Ange Postecoglou's football and how we perform this season, I don't think there's any real evidence that we're going to go and challenge for the Champions League or the Premier League next season. Maybe the FA Cup or Carabao Cup, yeah, absolutely valid. We got quite deep in the Carabao Cup last season, but I don't think it's one of those where we'd be sacrificing necessarily winning trophies next season. I can't see where we win a trophy next season unless we have a little run in the FA Cup or Carabao Cup. we're going to get nowhere near the Premier League or Champions League regardless of who our manager was, to be completely honest with you. I think the things that are going to feel weird for me as well is, like, I'm hopefully going to be travelling out to the Super Cup in Italy. Obviously it will feel weird doing that without Ange, because you really feel like he earned that and he was the one who got us there, and that's going to feel a little bit weird with the new manager. But yeah, like I said, I mean, is there anything else that I really wanted to talk about? I mean, I've sort of touched on Frank, touched on the owners being the actual issue. As we all know, I've done, like I said, I've done videos on this page before talking about the owners, the fact that they are the real problem at Tottenham Hotspur, and until they go, nothing will significantly change, and we're not going to be challenging for Premier Leagues or Champions League with those owners. Unfortunately, it just will never happen, and I think this summer is evidence of it once again. The way that this Ange Postecoglou situation has been dealt with is evidence of it once again. Like, you know, whether you were Ange in or Ange out, the way it's been dealt with, we can all agree has been a shambles. Yeah, I think, you know, I like Frank, and I'm going to get behind Frank 100%, and I do see a long-term vision there with Frank at this football club, and I do think that he has the ability to step up as a manager and take that next step in his career. I think it's something that he's wanted to do for a little while now, and I think it's something that he is going to work his arse off to try and achieve, and I'll be fully behind him every step of the way, you know, like I've been with Ange Postecoglou. And yeah, I hope everyone gives Thomas Frank a chance. If it is Thomas Frank, like I said, if it's not Thomas Frank, I dread to think who it will be. To be completely honest, he's my absolute number one choice at this point, and I hope that if he does come in, like I said, people will give him every chance to succeed and people will get behind him. Tottenham are good at doing that. You know, Spurs fans are good at doing that. We do get behind the new man, whoever it is, however we're feeling. And yeah, I hope everyone does that. There's enough of my rambling. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was coherent. I've literally just hit record and ramble for 17 minutes. There will be a video coming. I am restarting my YouTube now. I really took a break from YouTube just because of how down everything was from really January onwards. I barely uploaded, and obviously I was kind of waiting for this pre-season this summer and a decision to be made so I could come back in and really talk, whether it was Ange Postecoglou was going to be our manager, whether it was Thomas Frank, whoever it was. I just wanted it to be sorted so I could really go at the content. So if you are interested in that, please subscribe, please like the video, please let me know in the comments section what kind of videos you want to see this summer. I'm going to be obviously doing a lot of transfer stuff, a lot of the pre-season stuff. I'm going to do a video on Thomas Frank, if it is Thomas Frank. Next week, whenever that's announced, or whoever the new manager is, I'll be doing a video on them and sort of the fit and how I see. I'm going to get the tactics board up, talk about how I think we're going to line up under the new manager. So yeah, stay tuned for all of that. Nice one for watching. I appreciate it if you made this far, and yeah, nice one.